Have you ever found yourself leaving an interaction, replaying something over and over again in your head, sure that you said or did something wrong or ridiculous? You perseverate on it and resolve to follow up with the other person and make it right. But when you do, you come to find out that they didn't have any of the same thoughts or reactions. They were fine. The misery was all of your own making. Hello, listeners, and welcome to another solo episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. I'm your host, Kira Wackett, and today we're going to look at the role our thoughts can play in our lives when they go unchecked. When riddled with shame and self-doubt, our thoughts can become tainted by negative self-evaluation and can turn any interaction or circumstance into one we feel distressed around. Look, I know that place all too well. Leaving an interaction thinking about all the things I did wrong or could have done better. A deep bout of self-flagellation seems to attach itself to any interpersonal experience I endure, from ordering food or checking out at the grocery store to time with my husband and daughter. And what's interesting is to see just how different two parties can respond to the same interaction. I may have moved entirely past something said or done while someone else could have been stewing on it and existing in their anxiety ever since. So why does this happen? We're programmed with a basic human need for connection. Having a sense of belonging creates a sense of security and rooting within us, and our brain will do whatever it can to protect us from losing it. Enter shame. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you're already familiar with what shame is, but let's assume that this could be your first time hearing about it, or you just need a little refresher. Shame is an emotion. It comes from our fear part of our brain. And it's essentially the emotion or the fear that we feel when there's a threat, real or perceived, to our belonging. When shame is present, it triggers that anxious or fear-driven response. Now, if you haven't yet, I will make sure to put a link to that original episode, that shame overview one that I did, to give you a little bit more insight on it. But for now, let's talk a little bit more about why this is important to what we're learning today. By naming the fact that shame is housed in our fear part of our brain, what we're essentially saying is that it is entirely separate from our logic and reasoning part of our brain. So when our brain is turned on by shame, our fear response is activated and all of that logic and reasoning goes out the window. The purpose of our fear brain is to protect us, to keep us alive, to respond to threats that could put us in danger. And when shame is in the picture, the threat is assumed when anything has or could be done to weaken or disrupt our connection. In the case of shame, ambiguity, uncertainty, and vulnerability are threats that trigger the response. These feelings are associated with a risk of exposure. And fortunately and unfortunately, our fear brain doesn't play the odds game when it comes to risk. It's not going to wait it out or see what happens. Fear sees the world as binary. Things are good or bad, safe or unsafe, right or wrong. So in these moments, the possibility that things could be bad will always go to things will be bad. As such, when you feel like you said or did the wrong thing because of how someone did or didn't respond, your brain attaches like a magnet to this bad idea, leaving you perseverating on an incident pressed with an urge to fix it or follow up. So how has this been working out for you? The short answer is it's not. Rumination is a product of fear and anxiety and only works to deepen your shame brain and leave you feeling less than, judged, or bothered in some way. The more we ruminate, the more we twist our experiences, making ourselves the negative, juicy center of the storyline, assuming fault and failure for what was likely a neutral or even positive interaction. The reality is, we're not that important in other people's storylines. Sure, sometimes someone might be annoyed or upset with us or find something that we do or say to be weird or unkind or perceive it in a different way. They might even feel anxious about an interaction for a bit. But more often than not, they move past it. They process it, acknowledge their feelings, and move on. Or in some instances, don't have any energy or feelings towards the interaction in the first place. By repeating this pattern of interaction, perseveration, and correction seeking, we only deepen our shame narratives and give ourselves way more responsibility than is helpful or accurate in our interactions. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's better to stop caring about anything that happens between you and the people you interact with. I'm just saying it's important to be a bit more selective on how much space and time you give your anxiety in your head. It might seem helpful, but ultimately all it does is strip you of energy, take away time that could be spent on other things, and again, keeps you the center of a problem-saturated storyline. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do about it. When you leave an interaction and feel that rushing feeling in your gut, followed by statements like, I should have, or why didn't I? Simply acknowledge that those things didn't happen and it's okay. Pause and reflect on what evidence you have to suggest that you should have said X or done Y, and consider that to be a reflection rather than a truth. Do we know that as an absolute certainty? Or is it that we have difficulty dealing with ambiguity or distress? Consider if, in the moment, it's your responsibility to clarify what was said, apologize for what you did, or make better whatever situation has taken place. Is it truly that someone was upset with you, or did you just feel awkward and uncertain? Second, ask yourself why. Why do you want to say something? What's motivating you? Is it for you or them? I had a recent interaction with someone who's gotten caught in the loop of perseveration over an interaction we had and wanted to connect with me about it and make sure everything was okay. It would seem on the surface that they were saying something for me. They wanted to ensure that I didn't think or feel X when they meant Y. But if you go deeper, that follow-up, that continued interaction was really about them. What difference does it make if I thought that? Would it have changed my life? Probably not. But it may have changed my perception of them, which their shame is worried about would affect their sense of belonging. As such, the act of following up was actually rooted in a drive for self-preservation. Now, unfortunately, we've all given anxiety so much space in our brains, it has a key to every door up there. The only way to begin to take that access away is to bring those moments of pause and reflection into our interactions and to slowly work on increasing our ability to tolerate our distress, stay in our own story rather than worry about the character we're playing in someone else's, and show our brain that imperfection is not a threat to connection, but rather something that can bind us all. Now, as we wrap for today, I want you to ask yourself, what's one thing that you can take with you from this episode? One point to reflect on, one action step to put into practice, and write it down, either on a piece of paper that can go on your mirror or something that you're going to see every day, or honestly, go ahead and tell us in the Q&A or in the poll. Put it somewhere. Hold yourself accountable to it. Now, if you found today's episode valuable and insightful, I encourage you to leave a review, hit that 5-star button, and of course, share this episode with someone you think could benefit from hearing it. Thank you for tuning in today. And remember, change takes time, but every step counts. So stay the course, stay hopeful, and stay committed to your well-being. We'll be back with more insightful discussions to support you on your journey. Until then, take care, and we'll catch you next time.